podcast. The Heidelcast.
It's a Heidelminicast. And now, Scott Clark.
We've got a text asking about the similarities between the ancient church and today.
If the Heidelcast helps you, won't you help us keep it going? Please make the coffer clink by clicking on the PayPal link or by sending a check to Heidelberg Reformation Association, 1637 East Island Parkway, number 391, Escondido, California, 92027.
Well, while I'm opening up the coffer, pulling out this text message that, yes, even though it was a text message, I printed it out because that is the correct thing to do. And I only do the correct thing. So, I'm listening to podcasts and even real professional radio shows with real professional broadcasters, and people are scrolling through their screen or trying to get their PCs to boot up or whatever. And that's why you print stuff out, you see. You're not supposed to rattle the paper next to the microphone. That's not what they teach you in broadcasting school. But that's why I do that, so that you will know that I actually have paper in my hands. This is real, not just show business. Okay, the question asks, Dr. Clark, on April 3rd, in a Q&A episode of which podcast, you say? Which podcast? A Q&A episode of this here podcast, the Heidelcast, as you just heard. You spoke briefly about the Roman state religion, the modern state religion, and stated that it was a topic for another episode. I was hoping you could expand on this topic. In what way is society today similar to early Christians who refused to say Caesar is Lord? Thank you. This is from Frank. Well, thank you very much, Frank. That is an excellent question, and I will try to give you at least a mediocre answer. By the way, if you're just finding the Heidelcast, you can find us everywhere at Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Those are the two most popular places where people find the Heidelcast. And if you're just finding the Heidelcast, that might mean that you're just also finding the Heidel blog, which is at heidelblog.net. And you can subscribe there at heidelblog.net/subscribe, or just fill out the little blank there, put your email address in there, and we will send you a daily email. We don't spam you. We don't sell your email address. We just send you a daily rundown, sort of newsletter with the links for the day. Okay, so how to answer Frank's question. I thought, well, there are three ways, I think, in which there is continuity between our present time in 2024, year of our Lord, the pre-Christian or pre-Constantinian world, I guess is what I want to say. And then three ways in which we, I guess, experience discontinuity with the pre-Constantinian world, with the ancient pagan Roman world. So first, let's do the continuities. First, just like in the sort of pre-Christian, pre-Christendom, pre-Constantinian, or better, pre-Theodosian would be most accurate, because Constantine legalized Christianity, and to be sure, he was involved in the life of the church and even to some degree in the government of the church, insofar as he suppressed the Donatists and convoked the Council of Nicaea in AD 325, but technically Christianity was not yet the state religion. That didn't happen until AD 380, and so that's worth bearing in mind. Sometimes Constantine is sort of made to bear baggage, and I'm guilty of this. I've not been always very precise, sort of ignoring the 50 years difference, 55 years difference or so. Anyway, so one of the ways in which there's continuity between Christianity today, or at least our experience in the world, and that of the pre-Theodosian or pre-Constantinian Christians, is that there was ignorance of Christianity and hostility to Christianity. Now, there are reasons for that, and we'll get to that, and there are discontinuities as well. But what I see in the ancient Christian world, in fact, I tell my students there, you can divide up a history between, or in sort of three parts relative to Christianity: pre-Christendom, Christendom and post-Christendom. And we are in post. And when we look back at the pre-Christendom experience of Christians, that is before the formation of the church-state union and the establishment of the church as the state church of the empire, there was a lot of ignorance of Christianity. Most people, most places, most of the time knew little or nothing of Christianity. And to the degree that they knew anything about Christianity, they were hostile to it. And I think there are continuities here, too. I am not amazed, but it is striking how little most Americans know about Christianity. And you may know if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, but if you're new, welcome. I was not raised as a Christian, came to faith as a young man, and knew virtually nothing about Christianity when I became a Christian in the mid-'70s. I mean, so here I grew up in the middle of the plains, in the, Omaha was, I think, predominantly Roman Catholic, still is, I think, at least nominally. But when I came to faith, I was in Lincoln, Nebraska, and it was, I think, back then, predominantly Methodist. One of the most heavily churched towns, at least at the time, in the country. The Methodists used to run a PSA, public service announcement, and the tagline was, brought to you by your 52 local United Methodist churches. And that was back when Lincoln was about 140 or 150,000 people. It's about twice that now, and not as many Methodist churches now. They're closing or being turned into, at least some of them, into apartment complexes and things. So it was heavily churched, and yet I knew nothing of Christianity. And I think I was not alone. So already 50 years ago, there was, very little knowledge of Christianity, even in the middle of the country, where you might have expected there to be more. So today, I think there's considerable ignorance of Christianity, and I detect, and it's a subjective judgment, but I think there's some evidence for it, a growing hostility to Christianity, certainly among cultural elites, certainly in the various segments of the government, whether local, state, or federal, hostility in the educational, academic world to Christianity. I've sensed that certainly since I went to university. I experienced it to some degree in high school, not to a great degree, but to some degree. And it's only gotten more intense in the succeeding decades. I think now most college students, Christian college students who are attending state universities, and sometimes even nominally Christian universities, feel as though there's a significant degree of hostility to Christianity.
Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Clark.
Another area of continuity that I detect is the demand by cultural elites and sometimes by the government to submission to a state religion. And people have objected, to my call to return to, natural law and to, classical liberalism. They complain that I'm ignoring the fact that there's a state religion. And my response is, no, I'm not ignoring that. I want to disestablish them too, right? The response to the attempt by the cultural left and the political left to establish a de facto state religion is not to try to establish Christianity, but to disestablish neo-paganism, whether it's the religion of trans acceptance. It's a very blind religion. The trans movement is an indicator of widespread, apparently, mental illness among significant portions of our population for decades. And by decades, I mean 50, 60 years. I don't know how long the surveys were done, but as long as I can remember, there was a static percentage of the American population that identified as homosexual or lesbian, right? And I guess you could throw the other parts of the LGBTQ alphabet soup in there. I don't know how widespread any of that was. I don't think it really was. It was about 4% for decades. 4%. And most of that was male homosexual. That was the most significant proportion of that 4%. So a tiny percentage was female homosexuals or lesbians. And there were almost nobody was identifying as trans. It wasn't statistically significant, or any of the other parts of the LGBTQIA, et cetera, ad nauseum, alphabet soup. And today, a statistically significant percentage of young people are saying that they are somewhere on that alternative sexual continuum. And that's just mass hysteria. That is a form of sort of social or socially transmitted mental illness. There's no such thing biologically as a trans person. And biologically, there are males and females. That's just nature. That's just reason. Those are just facts. And so everybody else on that continuum suffers from some sort of disorder, a psychological disorder, sometimes a biological disorder, emotional disorder, and certainly a spiritual disorder. So to insist on, when the government insists that we acknowledge this, that we recognize this, and they seek to punish us for not using the politically correct pronouns, etc., when they seek to impose it as a matter of official policy by some agency or as law by some legislature, that is the imposition of a kind of state, and especially blind and ignorant state religion. It's an attempt to impose a kind of madness on us. So I get that. And the response, as I say, is not to establish a counter-religion on top of that. It's to disestablish this one, too. That's the American response. And again, I think because so many American Christians don't know how to distinguish nature and grace, and they're not familiar with nature as a category, they don't know how to think about these issues in that way. So there's another point of continuity. A third point of continuity is the cultural turn to magic and superstition. The religion of the ancient Roman world was essentially superstition, especially among the sort of populace. Not so much among the elites, although there were defenders of traditional Roman religion among the cultural, educational, and political elites. Most of the time, however, you were not really expected to believe that stuff. You were just expected to bow the knee. The real Roman religion, by the time Christianity appeared in history, was conformity. That was the real Roman religion. And in some ways, that is the sort of American state religion. Is conformity, which is strange for a people who pride themselves on being nonconformists and individualists, etc. There's a powerful impulse in this country, and long has been, to enforce conformity. And when I was a kid, I'm sort of raised on the tail end of the hippie movement of the 60s and early 70s, and everybody was an individual by wearing bell-bottoms. The exact same way, the exact same length, and everybody had long hair, guys and girls, and we all rebelled against the establishment by looking exactly like everybody else, as one of my teachers very ruefully and wryly pointed out when I was in school. All right, there are three ways in which I think there is significant discontinuity between our time and sort of Christendom Christianity. For one thing, this isn't the Roman Empire. We don't have a Caesar. Despite whatever political candidates may tell you, they are, I'm thinking about the candidates for the presidency, they are chief executives. They're not kings. They may have pens and cell phones, as one president said, I have a pen and a cell phone, meaning he could issue executive orders wherever he was. The president is still subject to a written constitution. No, we're not doing a very good job of following that constitution, but we still have one, and that constitution is the law of the land. It's not legal for any policy or any law to contradict the constitution, and it takes a while for those policies and laws that do contradict the Constitution sometimes to be overturned and to be recognized as contradicting the Constitution. But typically, most of the time, they are eventually recognized for what they are, contradictions of the Constitution, and then they are declared invalid, unconstitutional. So we have a written constitution by which we can hold our elected leaders and those in the executive branch and even in the judicial branch. We can hold them accountable, although with the existence of judicial review, it can be difficult to hold the judicial branch to account, but at least at some levels we can hold them to account. So the Constitution is supreme. Lex Rex, the law is king. right, over all of the people and over all of those who administer the law. All right, that's a very significant difference. And so we have a Bill of Rights, which guarantees, at least in the United States, the right of people, recognizes their natural God-given right to do certain things and to be free from state interference in speech, in the press, in the exercise of religion, in assembly, and so forth. That we hold these truths to be self-evident, we said in the Declaration, that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. So the state does not create these rights. The state recognizes them in law and then is instituted to protect those God-given rights. And that's a significant difference with the existence of pre-modern Christians. I'm thinking specifically of American Christians, obviously.
The best podcast, the Heidelminicast.
Secondly, there was the kind of hostility that the Christians experienced under Roman paganism, as opposed to the kind of hostility we experience under sort of neo-paganism, was rather different. Under Roman paganism, Christians stood a real possibility of being arrested, being forced to affirm the Roman religion and to say that Caesar is Lord and to denounce Jesus as Lord. When they lapsed, as the church said, they were made to pour out an offering and so forth. And so that's not typically happening. And then, of course, if they were witnesses to the faith, if they said, yes, I'm a Christian, right, the Roman interrogator would say, Christianus es, are you a Christian? And if the Christian said, sum, I am, that was the death sentence typically for the Christian. And very few Christians, if any, I don't frankly know of any in the United States, who are being put to death by the government. There's certainly unofficial hostility, and I think at some levels official hostility. In other words, there's cultural hostility, institutional hostility, educational hostility, and so forth. Hostility from the arts. And I'm certainly, would be naive to think that there's not profound hostility against Christianity in quarters of government at every level. That's obvious. But I don't know of Christians being arrested by the state and being punished for their Christianity, or if that's happening. And I'd like to see the evidence for that. I mean, there may be some cases of that, but I'm not aware of it. It doesn't seem to be widespread. I do try to pay attention, but I don't know of any place where Christians are being put to death by the state. I remember there was a mass shooter some years ago in the Pacific Northwest who asked children, as I remember, school children, are you a Christian? And if they said yes, they were murdered, if memory serves. I haven't taken the time to go back and look up that episode, but that was not state-sponsored persecution of Christians. So that is a significant kind of discontinuity, and we should bear that in mind. A third kind of discontinuity, and maybe somewhat frightening, is that in the sort of pre-modern ancient world, under paganism, under ancient paganism, technology was relatively limited, which limited the reach of the state. In other words, people had to be physically present. Somebody had to make a report of the Christians, and the state had to investigate it. And Romans tended to be fairly scrupulous about these things. We have actually some records of this, where a governor, Pliny the Younger, adopted son of the great scholar Pliny the Elder, wrote to the Emperor Trajan about AD 114, asking what to do about Christians in his area. And one of the things that happened was that some pagans who were angry at Christians essentially wrote an anonymous letter and sent it to Pliny. And when Pliny reported that to Trajan, the emperor, wrote back and he said, "We are Romans. We don't operate on the basis of anonymous accusations." So the evidence of a sense of conscience and justice among the Romans, the pagan Romans. Now, those Christians, some Christians, female Christians, servants were arrested and they were tortured, and that's one way that Romans frequently got information. In fact, they tended not to trust information unless it came via torture. So the treatment of Christians could sometimes be quite brutal, and it was terrible in the 3rd century. most of the 3rd century was more or less continuous persecution until the legalization of Christianity, first in AD 311 and then finally in AD 313. Now, today, we live in a high-tech world in which the state seems to be omniscient. There are cameras everywhere, and it's rather easier for the government to keep track of what Christians are doing and what Christians are saying. So, should the government, at the instigation of the people, begin a regime of persecution, then that could be rather more difficult in some ways for the Christians. It was not impossible for Christians in the ancient pre-modern world to meet secretly and to conduct their Christianity out of the way, out of eye-shot of the government. And high-tech, postmodern, post-Christian world, that could be a little more complicated.
Thanks for listening. Tune in tomorrow for more from the Heidelcast, brought to you by HeidelbergReformationAssociation.org. Don't forget, when the coin in the coffer clinks, the cost of bandwidth shrinks. Copyright Heidelberg Reformation Association. All rights reserved. This is a Heidel Media production.
The best podcast, the Heidelcast.